Should we start? Okay. Hello everyone. I am Bhavya Shah. I am a third semester master student in robotics and autonomous systems, artificial intelligence. I also possess a bachelor's in computer science and engineering from VIT Vellore. Today I'll be talking about image segmentation, which is an important task in computer vision. So a small request to the audience to please ask their questions and doubts during the appearance of the slides titled questions. These slides are spread throughout the presentation at good intervals so that you may get your queries cleared and it may not be distracting while I'm delivering. Thank you for adhering to this. So, segmentation. Segmentation by itself means separating or isolating something. In the context of marketing or sales, it is separating potential customers based on features like buying habits. In the context of security, cyber or physical, it is isolating parts of a system or organization based on vulnerability to attacks. In the context of images, it is separating pixels based on object boundaries, similarities, or some other characteristics. So, why do we need segmentation? Well, the task of segmentation lies in a sweet spot between image classification and object detection and enjoys the advantages of both of them while mitigating the shortcomings in each of them. Let me explain this. In the task of image classification, the goal achieved is being able to tell whether an object we want to find is present in the image or not. The issue with this is it cannot detect multiple objects, like it cannot tell when there is multiple objects in the image and where they are present. Well, the former issue, which is the multiple objects one, it can be mitigated by you doing multi-label classification rather than multi-class classification, but the latter one still remains. Moving to object detection, the advantage of object detection is, well, it can detect multiple objects in the scene, but it cannot do it with pixel level accuracy. Image segmentation, on the other hand, is able to do all of this while giving us pixel level accuracy. So yeah, that's more on that. Now, so let's move on to the types of image segmentation tasks that we have, which are semantic, instance, panoptic, and there's a fourth one as well that let's explore that a little later. Okay, moving to semantic segmentation. So semantic segmentation isolates pixels of an image based on characteristics like background, foreground, object boundaries, or user-defined classes. It tends to cluster different instances of different instances of the same class together. Thus, identification of individual instances of an object is difficult, but it still provides a good base to separate elements in an image. Semantic segmentation can be binary or multi-class. The most famous use case of binary segmentation is like treating people as foreground objects and their surrounding as background objects in Zoom calls or YouTube videos. I personally used multi-class semantic segmentation to segment out the sea, sky, and other objects like the boats or buoys in the sea as obstacles when I was working full time before my master's. So even medical image analysis is a major use case where semantic segmentation is used to identify various organs, tumors, different components of a cell, etc. Moving on to the task of instance segmentation. Instance segmentation is another type of segmentation where individual instances of a class are detected along with various classes themselves. It is useful when one wants to count and identify different instances with level accuracy and precision, thus mitigating the issues in semantic segmentation. The task can be thought as a mixture of semantic segmentation with object detection, where semantic segmentation provides pixel level class information And object detection provides instance level information like the counts of an object, like we see in the image. We can identify like there are three sheep in the picture with one dog. Yeah. So also this task flourishes when the image has discrete objects like pedestrians, cars, cells, etc. that we want to count. But this task faces a major issue. It cannot classify the whole image or a scene. Like we see that the grass behind it is not classified as either a background or the class grass. Moving on. So let's move on to panoptic segmentation. Panoptic means seeing everything in one view. So panoptic segmentation is a mixture of semantic and instance segmentation, where semantic segmentation is used to identify continuous objects like the sea, sky, roads, etc. Whereas instance segmentation is used to identify discrete objects along with each instance of the class, like cars, pedestrians, etc. In terms of implementation, one can think of it as an even higher wrapper over semantic and instance segmentation. This task can be used to identify a scene as a whole, unlike instance segmentation and like semantic segmentation. So in the image, as you can see, semantic segmentation merges the car, which is like merges the car class, which is represented by the dark blue color, whereas the instance segmentation can identifies the whole background as like everything in the background as a black class. Whereas panoptic segmentation clearly segments the background into its individual components like the building, sky, road, etc. And the car also individually identifiable. This is a short summary of the tasks and where we can use them. So I'll give you a minute to go over this because since it is not that difficult to, I already explained all of this. So that is it, right? Well, there is the last task that I was talking about, and it is called referred and reasoning segmentation. So referred and reasoning segmentation is the newest of the tasks in the segmentation family. It combines two domains, namely computer vision, which deals with the image input that we provide, and NLP, which deals with the textual input that we pass. This problem can also be thought of as a multimodal fusion or a multimodal problem where one or more modalities, which is the type of data, is passed through to the model and it outputs either one or more than one modalities. Uh, so referred and reasoning segmentation usually requires an LLM to be part of the model architecture as it takes care of understanding the text, thinking, reasoning, and sometimes segmentation itself. The main difference between reasoning and referred segmentation lies in the complexity of the textual prompt passed. Reasoning segmentation can have prompts as difficult as a riddle, and its answers can be the object that we want to segment in the image. Whereas referred segmentation can directly have a prompt containing the object to be segmented. Also, reasoning segmentation can also be an open-ended problem. It can be open-ended, like referring something that may not be in the image or the textual prompt. But referred segmentation is almost never an open-ended problem. So any questions up until this point? Are we good to move on? People over Zoom. Yeah, I think we are good to go. Nice. Okay. So this is a small table providing a list of models for each of the tasks. These are some of the most famous models that you may come across, and yeah, there are more models than this, but these are some that I found. And if you find some more, you can read about them by yourself. Uh, so now, before we dive into the models, let's play a game I like to call Have You Met Shapes? So this is important because it'll help you understand what we'll be doing in the hands-on session and also like to understand different concepts in the whole of deep learning and AI. So yeah, let's play it. So I'll be showing you an image of a tensor. You have to guess its shape, which sounds easy, and it is. So yeah, here's the first tensor that we are looking at. Can you guys guess the shape that we are looking at? Okay. So yeah, it's fairly easy since there are 8 cells in the figure and all of them are in the horizontal direction. We can say like it is along the columns direction. So we can say that the shape is 1 comma 8. Next, we move on to the second one, which is this one. And yeah, since it has six, six of them in the yeah, since it has 6 cells in the row direction, we can say that the shape is 6 comma 1. Well, the third one is could be a little tricky, but yeah, is this one. Can you guys see the black background in that, like in the black background, or I think I should turn off my night mode. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Oh, oh yeah. Oh, yeah, I should have done that before. My bad. Okay, so let's start again a little from the beginning. Yeah, so we saw all of these. So 1 comma 8, 6 comma 1, and we were on this one. So since it has one cell in the row and column direction, but it has 7 cells in the z direction, which is like into the projector's plane, we can say that the shape is 1 comma 1 comma 7. Next up is the grids. Like this should be fairly easy. Well, we have 4 cells in like 4 cells along the row, 4 cells along the columns. So the answer should be 4 comma 4. Yeah. The next one is again easy. Uh, do you guys want to give it a try? Yeah, apparently like this dimension is my bad. Yeah, so from this dimension, it is into the plane of the projector. So yeah, count accordingly. Are we good? Okay. So the answer is 2 comma 2 comma 4. This is because we have two objects in the, sorry, 2 cells in the direction of, yeah. We have 2 cells in the row dimension, 4 cells in the column dimension, and 4 cells again in the depth dimension or the feature dimension, as we call it. Finally, can you guys try to draw 3 comma 1 comma 4? It'll be a really good exercise, especially when we go to the hands-on session. Okay, let me show you the answer to this one. Yeah, so this is the answer for 3 comma 1 comma 4 comma 2. Well, it has 3 units in the batch dimension, 1 unit in the height dimension of each of this brick kind of a structure, 4 along the width dimension, and 2 along the depth dimension. Well, this is a pretty standard case when we go to the hands-on session where we'll be using batches of images to like train our models. Cool. I have one more exercise for you guys. Well, this time you have the shape will be given along with the operation that we perform on it, and you have to guess the shape of the output that we get. So let's get on with that. Okay. And yeah, apparently this is the TensorFlow format. PyTorch also has its own format, but it may be a little bit different. Let me explain that at the end of this slide. But yeah, so what should be the output shape when you pass a tensor of 4, 256, 256, 3 through a convolution like a conv2D layer with kernel size as 3, 64 filters, padding valid, which means there is padding, of course, with a stride of 1. So when we pass an image, like 4 images of size 256 by 256 by 3 through a convolution 2D layer, we get, well, 250, like 4 images again of size 256 by 256 with 64 filters, 64 dimensions along the feature space, like the z-axis. That is because the filters from the input get replaced by the number of filters that we have. This was explained by Kaustubh in one of our beginner sessions, so I would recommend you check out that video as well. Yeah, the next one is max pooling with a kernel size of 2. Does anyone want to give it a try? Okay. So well, the output is 4, 128, 128, which means that the height and width dimension got reduced by a factor of 2 because the kernel size here was 2. Uh, well, even this was explained, I guess, by Kaustubh in his previous lecture on like the beginner workshop. So I guess you can refer that when we look at, if you want to go into more details. Moving on, what if we pass our image through a dense layer, which is the MLP layer or the ANN layer or the fully connected layer that we talk about? Well, the answer to this is 4, 256, 32. Uh, it is kind of similar to the convolution operation, but it has some more stuff to it, which I'll be explaining in the future slides. Next, batch normalization layer. Well, the answer to this is pretty easy. It's the same shape that we pass as input because batch normalization does not change the image dimension or any of the, it does not mess with the shape of the feature vector. It is a mathematical operation. Well, upsampling with a kernel size of 2. Well, exactly what the opposite of max pooling. The answer is 4, 256, 256. Sorry, 512, 512, 3. So what it does is basically it increases the dimension, the height and width, which is the resolution, by a factor of 2 since the kernel size was 2. Well, let's get it a little bit more interesting with self-attention, which is a simple operation used by all the LLMs, transformers that we come across. So what if we pass a tensor of size 4, 256, 32 as the key, query, and value through a self-attention layer with 8 heads? Does anyone give it a try? Well, the answer is again 256, 32, like 4, 256, 32. The thing to see here is apparently it does not change the shape of the vectors, but it does perform some mathematical operations just like the batch norm. So when we add two tensors of shape 4, 10, 3, it's fairly easy. We get the same shape back since it is a mathematical operation and does not mess with the spatial properties of the tensor. What about concatenation? What if we concatenate two tensors? Oh, okay, I guess you cannot see it. But yeah, the tensor A is 4 comma 10 comma 3, and the tensor B is 8 comma 10 comma 3. So when we perform the concatenate operation, well, we get an error. This is because the dimensions are not the same along the batch dimension, which is like the 4 and the 8. In order to concatenate, oh sorry, that is not the case, my bad. Well, we did not define the axes here along which we want to concatenate. So unlike addition, we need to define an axis here if we want to concatenate it with our desired dimension or desired tensor. Well, this one is the correct case for this one, which does not give an error. So when we concatenate this along the axis 1, which is the 10 and the 5 here, we get 4 comma 15 comma 3, which is the addition of 10 and 5. And we are basically just joining the vectors end to end along the first dimension. Okay, with this, any questions until this point? Okay, cool. So let's move on to the first type of models that we'll be going through, which are semantic segmentation models. Uh, Quick question before that. So since we are dealing with images here and the lecture is on deep learning, which model or architecture comes to your mind? Oh, that's pretty obvious. CNN, right? Well, here we go. So remember CNNs? Apparently Kostub took this lecture and I hope he did a good job. So CNNs consist of a feature extractor and a fully connected layer. The feature extractor can be models like ResNet 50, VGG16, VGG19, etc. The fully connected layers are the multilayer perceptrons or artificial neural networks that we learned in the previous lectures as well. Finally, we also have a softmax layer or a sigmoid layer at the end of the final multilayer perceptron, which gives the probability distribution over the classes. Now, the main issue with this network is it cannot handle variable size image inputs. This means that the input to this network needs to be a constant size, like image of 256, 256, or 5 and 2, 5 and 2. But we cannot change that once it has been fixed. We investigate this issue further and find that the culprit here are the fully connected layers. Yeah, so that is because the input to an ANN, if we view it individually by taking it out of the CNN, is always a vector of a fixed shape, like the flattened layer that we see here. We cannot change the input once it has been fixed. So, yeah. So you must be wondering, like, why am I going through all of this trouble to explain CNNs if we are not going to use them or have an issue with them? Well, uh, it is because I just wanted to make it clear that we cannot use CNN directly when we are doing the image segmentation class, since we are dealing with pixels. And the pixels in an image can be can be a variable number as well. So when we pass an image as an input and we expect a mask to be an output, the pixels should correspond to each other. Like number of pixels in the input image should be equal to the number of pixels in the output mask. But if we mitigate this issue created by fully connected layers, our network will be able to handle variable image inputs and may be able to do image segmentation. Well, to do this, enter fully connected, fully convolutional networks. So fully networks are a type of network that mitigate this major issue with convolution neural networks. They do this by replacing the fully connected layers with convolutional layers with different kernel sizes. Usually the kernel size used is 1 cross 1. I'll be showing you in the next slide how we can substitute fully connected layers with CNNs. So these models were the first of their kind to only use CNN related layers like conv2D, batch normalization, pooling or downsampling, and also do upsampling operations. Now, from a little exercise earlier, we know that the downsampling reduces the image resolution and upsampling increases the image resolution, but both keep the depth or the feature dimension the same. In FCNs, the author only used one, two, or maximum of three upsampling layers, and either 0, 1, or 2 skip connections at the max. Especially in the different variants that we are looking at, which is the FCN32, FCN16, and FCN8. Well, these variants are named this way because they have because the authors used the upsampling and the skip connections only in this level of the architectures. Okay. So overall, as you can see that the mask quality is pretty poor as compared to like what we were expecting from the previous slides, which I showed you, but they tend to do the task. And especially the FCN 8s that we see here, they perform a little bit better than its previous two variants. Well, that is because it has the most number of upsampling layers and skip connections than its previous variants. Okay. And I'll be explaining the importance of skip connections and upsampling layers in a minute and like in the next architecture itself. So, like I said, how can we use like convolutional layers as a replacement for fully connected layers? So, as you can see here, the each neuron here in the input is connected to every other neuron in this hidden layer, which is the next layer. As we see here, we can see that when we have a kernel size of 4 and a stride of 2, the dark green balls that we see here, they are responsible for the value of the hidden layer, which is the next layer. So with a stride of 2, the first set of inputs that we would have used to compute this new value here would be these four. The second one would be these four. The third one would be these four. Uh, Now, if we use a kernel size of 1, we output the, we compute this neuron using each and every input here individually with a stride of 1, of course. So I hope that made it clear, like why can we use convolutional networks in fully connected layers, like as a replacement for fully connected layers. And if you have any doubts, you can always stop me at the end of the lecture or during the questions slides, and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, moving on to the unit architecture. Well, the unit is an improvement over FCNs. Here, the authors used upsampling and skip connections at and in between every stage of the architecture. Uh, the architecture can be broken in the encoder-decoder style setup. The encoder consists of a feature extractor like we discussed VGG16, Resonate 50, VGG19, etc. that downsamples the images uh, to a latent dimension, which is right here. Okay. The encoder, like the feature extractor part of the CNN, extracts features from the image and stores them in the latent vector and upsamples it to match the dimensions of the penultimate or the previous convolution block. Like this is where the encoder stops and this is the latent dimension that I was talking about. Now, the decoder then takes this latent vector and upsamples it to match the dimension of the penultimate or the previous convolution layer, which is this one right here. The green arrow represents the upsampling operation. The 3x3 convolutions which are used in the encoder as well as the decoder is represented using this dark blue arrow, and the con 1x1, which is the uh, used in the latent dimension here. Oh, sorry, my bad. In this output is what is represented using this teal colored arrow. Uh, okay. The upsampling operation performed by the decoder helps in understanding the spatial information of the feature extracted by the encoder. Also, after each upsampling operation, we add or concatenate the features extracted by the convolutional layers in the encoder, uh, which is this one right here. Like this is the skip connection that I'm talking about. Uh, yeah, they are shown in gray in the image, as you can see. They help in merging the what with the where. So these two operations are performed until we reach the original image resolution, which is passed through a softmax layer that converts the logits to masks or a probability distribution, honestly. Yeah, it converts the logits into the probability distribution over the given classes. To give you an analogy, think of arranging a jigsaw puzzle where you need to first see what each piece contains in terms of like the features of the image that it will be representing. And once we have done that, we are now putting the pieces together to achieve like to get the jigsaw, like the whole picture that we want to see. Okay. Any questions up until this point? Okay. I think we are good on the Zoom part as well. Good. Let's move on to our second type of models, which are instance segmentation models. Uh, okay. So instance segmentation models, the most famous model that everyone kind of knows is the RCNN family, like the mask RCNN. The mask RCNN is part of the RCNN family. The RCNN family was the first of models that that was the first model to kind of solve the task of instance segmentation and object detection, like using, of course, two different architectures. Every member of the family was always faster or more accurate than the previous member as they modified some part of the architecture. But all the models work more or less in the same way. Like I'll be discussing this. So Uh, so the RCNN family works usually this way. The input image is passed through a CNN backbone like ResNet 50, VGG16, VGG19, etc. for the feature extraction. The final layers feature maps, which you can see here, are passed through the RPN, which is the region proposal network. Well, region proposal network can be an algorithm, or in some of the modern RCNN architectures, is a neural network in itself that chooses parts of the feature maps called region proposals. As you can see, like once we have the feature map, it selects some regions where it thinks like there is some object which can be identified, and then these parts of the feature maps are resized to the same size to be passed to a task head. So once we select, let's say, this feature, we extract it out and we resize it to a same shape. Like it doesn't matter if it's like a horizontal rectangular object, a square object, or a vertical rectangle object. And all of them are passed through a fixed, converted to a fixed size feature map and passed to our task heads. The task head can be either a bounding box regressor, a classification model, or in our case, the segmenter, or you could say the decoder model. Okay. So, uh, so just to give an analogy to a previous model that I think everyone must have heard of, like the sliding window method. If you haven't heard this, then the sliding window was the first object detectors ever. What they used to do was they used to slide a window over the image and then try to the images that we can crop from that window were passed through a classification model, and then it would classify whether that object contains the class that we want to classify or no. Well, the fun fact is the sliding window model was one of the first RCNN family models not officially, but it works in a similar manner. While the sliding window protocol, sliding window model works in the feature dimension, the RCNN family works in the latent dimension, which is the feature maps dimension that we get from the output of the CNN. This makes computation like a lot lesser, since we are working in a lower dimensional space here than rather than the whole image. Okay. So moving on, okay, I can even show you a method which is used for the region proposal networks, since I don't think if you found it like the explanation quite useful, but this was one of the older feature region proposal methods that RCNN used in some of its models. It is called as the selective search. Well, it works by initially randomly assigning patches in an image and then merging them together to form bigger patches. Uh, and that corresponds to like complete objects in an image. So as you can see, this is, let's say, the random initialization, and now the patches are being merged in order to form bigger patches, and correspondingly we can see like the number of region proposals are reducing. One of the key features of this method was it gave preference to smaller clusters initially rather than large clusters, so that the large clusters don't overpower the smaller cluster objects. For more details, you can of course read the paper, which can give you more insight into this. Okay. With this, let's move on to panoptic segmentation models. Uh, Okay, so here the panoptic segmentation models are a bit complex than what we saw in the previous two tasks, but we'll go through them very easily. Okay, first let's see the mask former architecture, which is the predecessor to the mask 2 former. Okay, the flow of data in this architecture starts with passing an image through a backbone network that gives us the feature vector. So this is the backbone that I'm talking about. The backbone usually is a transformer, used to be a transformer like SWIN or some convolutional neural networks architecture like VGG, ResNet and stuff. And we get a feature vector out. Now this feature vector is given to the pixel decoder, which performs upsampling until we reach the original image's input dimensions. But the number of channels in the feature dimension or the resultant upsampling image is C epsilon, like we can see here. Like the image input resolution and the pixel embeddings that we generated here are the same resolution, but they differ in the number of latent the feature dimension that I was talking about. So the output of the pixel decoder is h comma w comma c epsilon. Now the feature vector is passed through a transformer decoder. Yeah, it is passed through a transformer decoder as keys, and queries are n vectors with e dimensions, which is of the shape n comma e, as we can see here. These vectors are called query vectors, and they attend to features extracted from the image, which is now encoded in this feature vector that I was talking about. The output of the transformer decoder is again n vectors with embeddings d, and but they are more aligned with the features extracted from the backbone. Uh, yeah. So also they correspond to n class agnostic masks. So right now we are not predicting the masks in the this part of the architecture, but rather the transformer gives out the masks that we are hoping to find. So this model basically works in a mask as a paradigm rather than seeing everything in a pixel format like the previous two architectures. Uh, Now, to project the dimensions from epsilon to like from e like sorry the n comma e, yeah. So the inputs, the output to the transformer decoder is n comma e. Now to project the n comma e shaped vectors to c epsilon, we pass it through a multilayer perceptron. Like we saw in the previous exercise, that passing it through a MLP converts it from n comma e to n comma c epsilon uh, shape. Then we calculate the dot product between the pixel embeddings and the n embedding masks. Mm, yeah, output of the decoder, which is and that is along the c epsilon dimension. So now we have n mask predictions, which are of the shape n comma w comma sorry h comma w comma n in the TensorFlow format that we saw earlier. Uh, Now the dot product ensures that correct query vectors are associated with the correct masks from the pixel decoder. The class of the yeah, the class of each channel of the mask is inferred from the multilayer perceptron output, as we can see in the image. Now to train this model, the loss we use is classification loss on the output of the multilayer perceptron and binary mask loss on the output of the dot product. During inference, we drop null masks after taking over the dot product between classes and mask predictions over the n dimensions. The highlight of this architecture is the flexibility in the number of masks one can predict just by changing the queries we pass to the transformer decoder. Like I said, the n queries that we passed are give out the n masks that we are looking for. Oh, also one more detail that I think I missed out is the scale. So here, after the multilayer perceptron also changes the number of like like changes the number of classes that we predict using this like by projecting it into k plus 1 dimensions. Here the k represents the number of classes and n represents the number of masks that we hope to achieve, like hope to get out of the architecture. And we add a k plus 1 mask because 1 is like corresponds to the background, which is by default added to the architecture. Okay. Now the thing about this architecture is it is on can only be used for semantic segmentation and not and not panoptic segmentation. But don't worry, our efforts did not go to waste. We need to understand this architecture before diving into mask 2 former. So let's go with the mask 2 former. Okay. So the mask 2 former has the same components as its predecessor mask former, but uses them in a different manner. Instead of passing the latent vectors to the decoder, it passes the feature maps from the image decoder to the attention layer in the transformer decoder. So like initially we were passing this to the decoder, but now we are passing the feature maps from this decoder network to the transformer decoder. We do this like this is done to use the multi-scale features that we extracted rather than a single vector. Um, Now the feature maps from different scales from the pixel decoder are passed to the transformer decoder as queries, like we did in the previous one. As we learned in the mask former, we input query vectors to the mask decoder as keys, like we did here, keys, and these are the queries. But we need to change the transformer decoder architecture a little bit to handle the multi-scale features that we are passing to it. Oh, So each query vector that we pass needs to look, yeah. So now we use the transformer decoder was modified to use multi-scale deformable attention, which took in multiple feature vectors from different scales of the pixel decoder. Now, since we have the like so many feature maps from the decoder, pixel decoder, attending to all of them, like the query vectors attending to all of them would make this operation very costly. So, uh, so each of the query vectors that we pass need to look across all the it technically needs to look across all the different scales, but to mitigate this, the authors using like the multi-scale deformable attention show, which is like this one right here, uh, shows that like we don't need to compute like let all the query vectors attend to all the keys. Mm, okay. Yeah. So what we can do is make the query vectors attend to specific parts and scale of the feature map rather than see like attending each query vector with the feature map, each feature map. We also use mask attention in this architecture here so that the query vectors that we pass, they can look at the only the object that they want to mask out rather than the whole image, and can attend more to the foreground rather than the background as well. Okay. So any questions until this point? You good? Okay. Let's move on to referred and reasoning segmentation models that I was talking about. Yeah, it is pretty cool, honestly, because they use LLMs along with the decoder, and we can tell them what to segment out. So the first model that we look at is segment anything model, which is SAM. It was introduced by Facebook's AI research team in 2023, I believe. Yeah. So this model became the first foundation model for segmentation tasks. A foundation model is a model that is trained on huge amounts of data and requires minimal fine tuning to be adapted to a new task or data. In Sam's case, the authors trained it with over 1 billion masks across 11 million images. So as you can see, there is a mismatch between the number of masks and the number of images that we have. That is because each image, they used different levels of masking to train the model. So for example, it could be the case of a self-driving car, and they initially tried to segment out cars as a whole. Then in the other mask, they tried to segment out different parts of the car. Let's say the wheels, the uh, chassis, the body of the car, that way. Hence, we have more masks than the number of images that we pass. Well, this team did a good job, and they also created a data set consisting of images and masks known as the SAM1B or the 11B data set. And it became a benchmark as well. Now, SAM's biggest selling point was it was promptable. That is, along with passing image as an input, we can pass other modalities like points, bounding boxes, and masks to direct the model towards a mask. So since the input to SAM is like inputs are like the inputs to SAM is different modalities, like we see the points, boxes, and stuff. They need to be processed independently before merging them together with the image input. So the architecture needs to be quite flexible in order to handle all these modalities. Okay. Now to encode these points, or more like understand what these points represent, um, they were encoded using methods like positional embeddings, convolutional layers, and yeah, that was pretty much it. Because the bounding boxes can be interpreted as 2 points, because like along the diagonals of the bounding box, and the points can be a single point as we see here, and the mask can be interpreted as an image. So to encode these modalities, the points were represented as positional embeddings, like uh, let's say coordinates in the image, and the masks were passed through a convolutional uh, architecture of some sorts. And one the output of this was like the embeddings itself for each of these inputs. Uh, yeah, and the image was encoded using the standard image encoder, which in this case was the VIT-B or the VIT-H, which is a vision transformer. Uh, Now, since these prompt encoders that I was talking about, they output more than one vectors, we only use the learnable vector that we pass through the um, yeah, that we pass along with the prompt encoder, and it is concatenated with the image embeddings that we get from the image encoder, like this plus sign right here. Uh, Now, to generate the masks, the authors use a lightweight mask decoder, which is actually a transformer in this case, and not the usual decoder that we saw in the previous architectures. Yeah. So this decoder was a little different from the original transformers as well, as it had image to prompt and prompt to image attention layers. This means that uh, we were looking at the image and then understanding the prompts that we have passed, and also understanding the prompts and looking at the image while at it, like the other way around. The output of SAM is usually different masks, as we can see here, along with a confidence score. So if our prompt says that we want to segment out the scissors in here, like using points which are clicks on the image or something of that sort, then we get the whole scissor um, segmented out with a highest confidence score, along with various parts of the scissor with lower confidence scores. And yeah, the mask is usually generated in almost the same way as we saw before. Well, one of the key things here is text was never, in the SAM1, text was never used as a prompt encoder. This could be the SAM2 architecture that they have mistaken it for. But yeah, this is how we can use the architecture when we are fine tuning it. So the image is passed through a frozen image encoder, in this case VIT, and if we want to fine tune it, we can use LoRa layers here. So LoRa at its core adds more weights, like lower number of weights than the original encoder, but they are learnable while we freeze this encoder. So it is like adding more cells to our brain, and while keeping our original brain frozen and still using its layers, using the representation it gives. Yeah, the prompt encoder can be fine tuned or fully trained to achieve the custom mask that we are looking for. Finally, the SAM model is used with a lot of LLMs in order to generate masks. So it acts as an executor of the masks. Nice. So coming to the LISA model, the LISA stands for Language Instructed Segmentation Assistant. This paper introduced embedding as a mask paradigm. This model is fairly simple to explain. So, in order to train this model, we expand the vocabulary of a LLM by one token, which is the seg token, as you can see here. This is the seg token that we are talking about. Now we pass the image through the LLM along with the prompt, and we get an output for that. It usually is a textual output, but it may contain a embedding corresponding to the seg token. The image is also passed through a vision backbone like VIT in order to extract features. And when we encounter this seg token, the features from the vision backbone and this feature vector from the context vector from the seg token is passed through a decoder. The decoder here usually is the SAM architecture that we talked about, and this is how we generate an image for which corresponds to the query, like the text that we passed. In this case, which is the food with the most vitamin C, and it segments out the orange in this image. During training, we can either freeze the LLM or uh, train it from scratch, or we can even fine tune it using the LoRa weights that I talked about earlier. Same thing can be done with the decoder and the vision backbone. The authors apparently froze the vision backbone and the LLM, but fine-tuned the LLM and the decoder part of the architecture. Mm, Okay. So the highlight of this model is it generates a mask and the explanation as to like uh, why did it segment out that mask, or some kind of a text explanation for as a response. Any questions until this point? Okay. Now we have our architectures in place. The next important choice is that of the loss function. Depending on the task and method the architecture generates a mask, we choose a loss function. Semantic segmentation uses uh, one of these losses on pixel level, as uh, semantic segmentation is a pixel level classification task. Yeah, so we can calculate the loss per pixel, which is a binary loss usually, and then we can sum it over all the pixels in the image or average them to get image loss. Instance segmentation, okay, yeah. Instance segmentation is a little bit different in this case. Since we try to model the problem as a clustering problem, where data points of the same cluster need to be together, whereas the distance between two different clusters should be as far as possible. Um, yeah. Finally, for panoptic segmentation, referred and reasoning segmentation, we have a compound loss that is usually preferred as the tasks consist of one or more smaller tasks like generating a mask or classifying them. Um, so yeah, we can use some kind of a compound loss, as we can see here. Mm, um, yeah. In for the uh, for example, binary segmentation loss in panoptic segmentation should be like binary segmentation in panoptic segmentation is for classifying whether an object should be segmented as an instance or a semantic class as a semantic task. And once that is achieved, we can use the regular loss functions, like if it was classified to be a semantic segmentation object, then we use the semantic segmentation loss on it or the instance segmentation loss on it. Similarly is the case for refer and reasoning segmentation. Okay. Now we move on to the metrics part of it. Metrics are another important factor in training these models as they determine how our model performs. Metrics are absolute quantities that have a physical meaning, and comparing them gives us an idea which model is performing better. Since segmentation in itself is a pixel level classification task, we can use the classification metrics on pixels by calculating a confusion matrix per image and getting the implied metrics like accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score. Even things like AUROC, which is area under the recall over uh, confidence score, and even specificity and sensitivity scores. But since in an image the number of pixels per class are unbalanced, that is, class A can correspond to the sky, which can have a large number of pixels, as opposed to class B, say handbag. Uh, using confusion matrix based metrics is not fair. Also, these metrics are based on counts of pixels corresponding to a class and do not take into account the physical attributes like distance and area, which are important when seeing the mask as a whole. Uh, Hence, to mitigate this issue, we use area or distance based metrics like multiclass IOU, which calculates the ratio of intersection of the masks over the union of the masks, as you can see in this image. So the red one is the predicted mask, and the black one is the ground truth. We calculate the intersection of these two masks, and we take its ratio with the union of these two masks. The quantity is usually between 0 and 1. Yeah. Another important metric for panoptic segmentation is the panoptic quality, PQ. Uh, yeah, it works. It actually is a better metric because it takes into account the IOU, which is a distance based metric, and the true positive, and false negative, which is the metrics we generated from our confusion matrix, which are pixel level metrics. Hence, it is a better because it combines the best of the two worlds. So any questions up until this point? Cool. For a Zoom people. No? No. Now, moving on to our hands-on session, we can scan the QR code right here and it'll take you to a very smart guy's repository. Yeah, a lot of commits though. Nice. And here, let's find out the mm, oops. Yeah, here in the repositories, let's look for, yeah, road segmentation repository. And yeah, this is what we'll be working with. And this is the link to to that repository. I would suggest that you start this repository and we can start with our hands-on session, which is right here. Okay. Now the first part of the hands-on, I did not templatize this code since I did not have much time with me for the presentation, for preparing the presentation. So I'll be going over this code, and yeah. So the first setup that I would recommend is to change the runtime type from CPU to TPU. The free tier of Collab has the T4 GPU, whereas the paid tiers one can use the A100 GPUs and any other hardware that we are talking about. Yeah. So let's increment this slide. So the first cell of the object, first cell of this hands-on imports our Google Drive into the repository just in order to save the weights or save some kind of an output or something to work like to save something permanently, because once this session runs out, all the uh, temporary variables and files are going to be deleted unless you are signed in. Okay. The next part of the code, like the next cell here represents like is used to import data sets from Kaggle directly into our workspace. Uh, this can be, yeah. So here you can use your own Kaggle's API key, and yeah, this should basically connect your repository, sorry, this notebook to Kaggle. Next, we download the datasets. For the datasets, we are going to use the Carla VD dataset that we saw here. It consists of the images from the Carla simulator, which is like a self-driving simulator, and the corresponding ground truth masks that are already generated in the dataset. And we install TensorFlow since I'll be using TensorFlow for this tutorial. Now, once we have downloaded our dataset, let's unzip it and upgrade our TensorFlow to the latest version. Yeah, once that is done, we remove some of the unwanted files in our workspace so that we may get some more memory. Yeah. This is the output that we get from all of that. Now we import our libraries. Here we'll be using OS for working with the operating system, math for mathematical tasks, CV for reading images, resizing them, and all the pre-processing part. NumPy, since OpenCV interprets images as NumPy arrays, we'll be using NumPy as NP. Pandas to arrange our data set for better loading and stuff. Random to randomly sample images from our data set. Shootle to delete folders since OS is not capable of that. We are using image size in order to get the image size of our objects. TensorFlow for all the deep learning tasks. Matplotlib to visualize different stuff like the mask, images and stuff. Then we import the train test split um, to split our dataset into training and testing. Any doubts up until now? Okay, looks good. Okay. Yeah. Moving on, we define our image directory, which is the place where we all our images will be stored, and the masks corresponding to those images. We represent the data set as a DF, like the data frame format, so it is easier to visualize the image and their corresponding masks. So this is the output that we get from the image path. Sorry, the data, like as this is the head of the data frame, which is like the 5 samples from the start of the data frame. Next, these paths that we see here are relative. So we need to define absolute paths since we are using Collab. Uh, and in order to like locate the image as well, and we don't get image not found or file not found errors later. Next, we do some EDA on top of that, which is exploratory data analysis, to get the image dimensions and to visualize like if the mask and the image have the same dimensions. And we can see that the mask usually has an like the image and the mask have a width of 800 and a height of 600 pixels. And since there is no there is a standard deviation of 0, which means that all the images are already resized to 800 comma 600 pixels. And we have a total of 1454 samples in our data set. Now we visualize a couple of images and masks using this plot function. It's fairly easy. So what we do is we define a matplotlib plot here with a fixed size of 32 and 32 comma 18. We go over each of the rows and columns that we have defined here. Like we want 3 rows and 4 columns. I would recommend keeping the columns as a even number, since we'll be visualizing the mask and their corresponding image. So we parse over each of the plots. We randomly sample an image from our data set. Yeah, we read the corresponding image path. We read the image which is encoded in that image path and the mask path, of course. We perform all the same operations like converting color from BGR to RGB and resizing them sometimes. This is important because OpenCV by default reads in the BGR format, and to visualize in platforms like Matplotlib, we need RGB data. So this is the output that we get from the plot. So as we can see that there's some road here, and the lines which divide the road, they are highlighted in the mask. Well, we can see some trees, some cars up ahead, buildings, roofs and stuff. Yeah, we even have some cluttered scenes wherein there are a lot of cars on the road. And yeah, this is a good point to visualize our images. Okay. Now, once we have done all visualize our images and the masks, we need to get the unique pixels in the mask. Like unique pixels, because I don't have the information of the classes in this data set. So I'm trying to infer that from the mask itself. So I'm reading an image, I'm converting it into the corresponding format RGB. Then I am taking the unique masks corresponding to each of the pixels. So the road is represented by this dark purple color. So this corresponds to one class. Similarly, the pavement using this pink color, that's another class. Trees by the green color, which is another class, and so on. So doing this, we get all these classes the corresponding to the classes in our mask, and these are the RGB values for each of them. This 00142 corresponds to the RGB value. So since the R and G values are 0 here and the B value is 142, this should roughly correspond to our car class, and so on. We encode this since we want to convert our masks from a RGB to a single channel masks, like the grayscale mask. Hence, we encode this value with the number 0. We are technically squishing down the dimensions along the z-axis. Yeah. So, mm, okay. Yeah, this is a similar plot that I showed you. Display class. Yeah. So the operation of encoding gives us the following masks. So we want to basically, let's say, given this image and this mask, we want to split our mask into, instead of a single mask, we want n masks corresponding to each class. So this mask in the image should represent all the pixels in our road to be the foreground and everything else as the background. Similarly, here the street lights need to be represented as the foreground and everything else as the background. So basically, we are converting our mask into a binary mask with n channels, where n represents the number of classes. Cool. Now this is an extra step that I did here. In order to increase the size of my data set and to reduce the number of dimensions that we have to process, like the resolution, um, I cropped the masks along the height and the width um, dimension. So initially, as we saw, that we had images of size 800 comma 600 here. Now I am cropping the masks, cropping the image and the mask to create uh, a larger data set with more number of images of size 384 along the height and 512 along the width. This is because to save compute and reduce the training time as well. And I am saving all of these cropped quantities in this folder here. So now this is our new folder corresponding to our data set and not the old folder that we defined above. And this is the masks in the data frame format. And this is the new masks that we generated using by cropping the different parts of the image. They look pretty similar because I cropped a majority chunk of the masks of the image and the masks. So yeah. Now we split our data set into train, test, and validation using the train test split. So I got a total of 4,362 images after cropping from the 1,500-ish images that we had in our original data set. And now when I split it into, I want to use the split where the training has 4,000 samples, whereas the training and validation, sorry, the testing and validation have 181 images. Next, we define the pipeline, which is our data loader. If you are a PyTorch user, this corresponds to this is actually is a combined class for data loader and data sets class. In TensorFlow, both of them are combined into one. Also in the newer TensorFlow documentation, which is uh, yeah. Currently we are on the TensorFlow 2.16.1, where this sequence class has been renamed as the PyDataset class. So if you're running this code, the minor change that we need to make is tf.keras.utils.pydataset instead of sequence. Everything else remains the same. Yeah, we define the init method, which initializes this pipeline class. In the initialization, we need to pass our data frame here, the X column in the data frame that we have, which corresponds to the image, the Y column in our data frame, which corresponds to the mask, and the batch size, how many batches we want to pass in our data frame at a time, the height, width, and channels in our of each of the image, and the class list. In order to calculate the loss in our model. Next, we define the underscore len method, which is a special method which defines like how long our pipeline should be. Yeah, so we divide our total data frame by the batch size. So if we have, let's say, 4,000 images and with a batch size of 10, we get 400 samples to be passed to our model. Okay. This is an optional method that we can define customly on epoch end. So once our epoch is ended, what should happen? Well, once our epoch ends, our data frame should shuffle itself, so we don't pass in the same order of the samples, and we need to reset the index of since it's a data frame object. Now we have the get item function, which is also a special method that we need to define in our pipeline class. What it basically does is it reads the image, it reads the mask, converts it into a numpy array, and we uh, concatenate batches of images along the batch dimension. So as we saw in the tutorial, in the thing before, in the exercise that we did earlier, that we were passing a size of 4 comma 256 comma 256 comma 3. So the 4 that I was talking about is the batch size, and we need to bring our images into the same dimension. Now we define all of this, and we test out one of the, like we sample one of the samples in our pipeline, and we get the input to be a size of uh, to be a tensor of batch size 16, height to be 384, width to be 512, and 3 channels. So this corresponds to our image tensor, and this is the corresponding mask tensor. You can see that we have 20 channels in the mask tensor. This is because the number of classes that we have are 20, which was inferred from uh, this classes dictionary. So 0 to 19, which corresponds to 20 classes in total. So once we have our pipeline ready, we can now start building our model architecture. I'll be using the unit architecture, and we'll be like doing it pretty easily. Uh, so just to give a recap of our architect, like how unit looked like, let me go back. Yeah. So as you can see, the unit consists of an encoder and a decoder, which are connected by this latent dimension. The encoder, like I said, was the feature extractor, which here I'll be using as a pre-trained VGG 19 model with include top equals to false, which means that we won't be using the classification head that is usually attached with the uh, image. Sorry, with the model, the VGG 19 model. Yeah. So now, once we have that here, we can store it in the base, and we can extract the output from its various layers, like the block conv2, block 2 conv2, block 3 conv4, which correspond to the which correspond to these layers that I was talking about, like before we do a downsampling operation. Since these outputs need to be passed as skip connection to our decoder network. So we save it into these S1, S2, S3, S4, S5 variables. Finally, we take the output from this model, which is the base.output. And oh yeah, I've also defined the shapes, like how do the shapes look like. So the input shape should be 3 comma 384 512 comma 3. The output shape from these intermediate layers is 384 512 64, since the VGG 19 has 64 uh, filters in the first convolutional block, like the output of the first convolutional block. And since we can see that the number of feature dimension increases as we go down and the resolution decreases. Finally, the base outputs dimension is 12, 16, 512, which you can see is 384 divided by 12, which shows us we have almost 2 raised to 5 layers. Sorry, 2 raised to 5 times we are downsampling it, which is like 16 times. We are downsampling the original image by a factor of 16 here. Next, we have the conf 2D, which is the bottleneck that we have in our architecture, or this is what processes the latent dimension. From this point forward, we start with our decoder layer. Now, the decoder layer starts from this point onwards. We have a yeah, so we start with a conf 2D layer with 512 kernels, 512 filters, kernel size 3, and padding as same. Uh, Padding same corresponds to that the we'll be using padding to match the output input dimensions with the output dimensions of the convolutional layer. Next, we pass through a batch norm, activation of ReLU, and upsampling. Then we take in the S5, which is the output that we got from our encoder, and concatenate it with the input from the previous layer. So just to analogize here, uh, so this is the 1024 that we passed through the convolution layer, and then we do an upsampling. Once we are here, we concatenate the features from our encoder, and then we pass it again through the convolutional layer. Then we upsample it again, concatenate, convolution. So yeah, so we do this a bunch of times, and output dimensions I have highlighted in the comments here. Finally, after the final concatenation layer, we pass it through a conf 2D layer, which uh, converts our 128 feature dimension to a dimension of 20, which corresponds to the number of classes that we want to predict. So yeah, this is the final output that we are looking for in our mask. And if you could see, like, this matches the output mask that we get from the um, pipeline, which is the data loader. Cool. And just to see how our model looks like, we can use the model.summary method, and it will give you each layer along with the output shape it has. It even shows you the full VGG architecture up until this point. And yeah, we can move ahead with that. Yeah. So yeah, it also shows you the number of total parameters that we'll be training. How much how much memory will our model take in the GPU? Total number of trainable parameters, number of non-trainable parameters as well. Now since I discussed, like, we want classification metrics are not sufficient, we define a distance based metrics, which is a custom metric here, custom metric class here, and it calculates all of this together, which is the precision, recall, accuracy, F1 score. Yeah. Mm, So update state, what it does is, after each prediction, we want to calculate the metrics. So it does that for each sample in our each sample that the training loop will process. So we pass our y true, which is the true mask. We pass in our predicted mask, and we calculate all these metrics that I showed here. So. mm, yeah, so all of these metrics are pretty simple to understand. We can see their formulas online, and yeah, so this is precision is pretty much true positive divided by the sum of true positive and false positive. Recall is true positive divided by the sum of true positive and false negative. Accuracy is sum of, like, all the true positives divided by the all the entries in our uh, confusion matrix. The confusion matrix is uh, calculated here for each of the pixels in the image. Uh, yeah, So after this, we take the mean of the uh, metrics along the batch dimension, since we have a batch of images that we'll be processing. Finally, we print out the results, uh, like mean precision, mean recall, accuracy, and mean F1 score. We also define a custom callback. So a callback is a class that is called after every not after yeah, after every epoch. So it can have some characteristics like early stopping, which means that if our training loss isn't decreasing, we can stop the model training. Thus, it will save our compute and stuff. But here, the custom callback that we are looking for is yeah, it is showing an image and the corresponding true mask and the mask that we predicted. So I'll go over this when we see the training. We also use early stopping, which is an inbuilt callback, model checkpoint, reduce learning rate on plateau, and a mean IOU metric as well, along with the custom metrics that we saw earlier. Model.compile basically compiles our model in the TensorFlow's computation graph format, and we pass the metrics that we want to see during training as a list here. Model.fit basically starts our training loop, and we pass our data sets here, callbacks here, how many epochs that we want to train, what is the batch size that we are looking for. Yeah, the train generator or the data loader that I was talking about. And we can see this is the initial prediction at epoch 0. And this is the metric that we get corresponding to it. We have an accuracy of 60% with a training loss of 1.7.324, mean F1 score of 24%. As you can see, like there is a huge difference between the accuracy and the mean F1 score. That is because accuracy deals with is better when your data set is balanced. But here, since we have a pixel level classification, it won't be balanced. Hence, accuracy is not a good metric to judge our model on. Whereas F1 score, it can handle unbalanced data sets. We also have a mean IOU score here of 15%, precision, recall. The main thing to look out here is the validation metrics that we are going through. Um, the validation loss, if it is increasing, unlike the training loss, it means that our uh, model is trying to memorize the data and not generalizing it. So it won't help our training at all if that is what is happening. Um, yeah, so this is the baseline that we set up, like a mean IOU of 42% in the validation data set. The validation data set it has not seen before, like we do in training. So we can trust that. And as we go lower into the training, we can see that the masks are improving. They are not perfect, but they are improving. And on the free tier of the Google Colab, I could only train for almost like 13 epochs, and I got an accurate like F1 score of 79%, IOU of 78% um, on the training data set and other metrics. Whereas on the validation data set, um, I got a mean F1 score of 79. Uh, yeah, which is pretty good. And considering that our learning rate did not decrease, which means that our training hasn't plateaued yet. So if we train for more epochs, we might be looking at a better accuracy. Here we plot the accuracy and the other training metrics that we found. Yeah, I don't have a plot for this, but if you run the code, it should be good for it should be pretty clear like how our learning rate and stuff look like. Learning rate, accuracy, precision, F1 score, and other metrics, even the loss as well. Now for inference, I have written this function which takes in image from either the image path, or we can directly pass an image to it, and we should give it a model path. We load our model here, and sorry, we don't load our model from the weights. Uh, we load our model from the weights, and then we make the prediction on the custom images that we provide. The inference script has almost the same outputs that we see here. So this is the predicted mask after training the model. This is the image input that we found, and this is the mask we were looking for. Like, this is a true mask. And yeah, that's it from my side, I guess. Yeah, is it any doubts on this? Okay. So, I'll, anyone has any doubts online? No. Okay, then I'll stop sharing my screen, and yeah, thank you all for coming here and listening to me.